For over 650 years, the gladiator games were pretty much the heart and soul of Roman entertainment. But they were so much more than just a sport, right? They were a political weapon, a way to keep society from boiling over, and a mirror that reflected what it meant to be Roman. So how does something that central to an entire empire just vanish? Okay, let's get into it. Take a look at this. This isn't just a hunk of metal. It's a total paradox cast in bronze. On one hand, it's the brutal reality of a life that could end at any second. But on the other, it represents this incredible shot at fame and glory that you could win out there on the sand. For the man who strapped this on, it was both his shield and his death sentence.
So this is the real question we're digging into. What was it about these violent shows that made them so absolutely essential to the Roman way of life? And what in the world was powerful enough to finally bring it all to an end?
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll see why these were way more than just games. Then, how they became a politician's secret weapon. We'll get to know the stars of the show themselves, the gladiators. After that, we'll look at how emperors took the whole thing to a completely new level. And finally, the grand finale, how the spectacle finally ended.
All right, first up, bread and circuses. You've probably heard that phrase thrown around. But in Rome, this wasn't just some abstract idea. It was a literal, hands-on strategy for keeping control of a society that was dangerously divided.
You really have to picture this. It was a tale of two cities in one. On one side, you've got a tiny, incredibly wealthy elite. On the other, you have the masses, a huge, restless population crammed into the city, most of them unemployed and pretty ticked off about it. I mean, Rome was a powder keg, and the ruling class knew it. The games were their solution. They were a brilliant distraction to keep everyone entertained and, more importantly, to keep them from getting any revolutionary ideas.
And to really get a feel for that wealth gap, look at this number. 50,000 sesterti. That's what a general might spend on a single dinner party. Now, for some perspective, a Roman legionary, a guy risking his neck for the empire, made just 480 sesterti for the entire year. When the gap is that insane, the games aren't just entertainment. They're a pressure valve, giving the people something to feel a part of when they had pretty much nothing else.
But keeping the masses distracted was only half the game. For any ambitious politician in Rome, these spectacles were also the most direct route to the top. This was the cursus honorum, basically the political career ladder in Rome. And just look at that crucial second step, aedile. As an aedile, your number one job was organizing the public games. And the logic was simple. If you threw an absolutely unforgettable party for the entire city, people would remember your name when it came time to vote. It was a huge gamble. It could totally bankrupt you, but it was the best investment an aspiring leader could possibly make. Okay, so we've talked about the politics. We've talked about the crowds. But what about the actual men in the middle of it all? Who were these stars of the bloody sand? Well, their story is way more complex than you might think.
The arena was a real grab bag of fighters. Of course, you had the people you'd expect. Condemned criminals, prisoners of war, folks with no other choice. But here's the kicker. You also had volunteers, free men, sometimes even nobles, who chose this life. Why? For a shot at fame, fortune, or just the pure, raw adrenaline of it all.
This one phrase tells you everything you need to know about the Roman idea of courage. It was the highest praise you could give a fallen soldier. It wasn't about winning. It was about facing death with your head held high. That was the virtue gladiators were supposed to perform for the crowd, and it was something every Roman deeply, deeply admired. And here's the great paradox of the gladiator. On paper, they were outcasts, stripped of their rights as citizens. But in the real world, they were superstars, absolute sex symbols. The satirist Juvenal really hit the nail on the head here. Roman women, even the high-born ones, were famously obsessed with these guys. They were the ultimate bad boys. Now, once the Republic collapses and the emperors take over, the games get supercharged. They're not just a tool for politicians anymore. They become this terrifying, over-the-top expression of one man's absolute power and, let's be honest, his ego. The emperors treated the games like a personal competition, each trying to outdo the last. Augustus floods a massive artificial lake to stage a mock naval battle with 3,000 fighters. Caligula literally burns through the entire imperial treasury on his spectacles. And then you get Nero, who shatters every social rule by performing in the arena himself, not as a warrior, but as an artist. The arena became their personal stage, and the scale just kept getting bigger and crazier.
So, after centuries of being at the very center of Roman life, how did it all just end? Well, it wasn't one single thing, it was more like a perfect storm of social, economic, and moral forces all converging at once.
So here are the ingredients of that perfect storm. First, you've got the rise of Christianity, with a new morality that saw public slaughter as a sin, not entertainment. At the same time, the empire's economy was crumbling. They simply couldn't afford these insane parties anymore. And then, the final nail in the coffin, the sack of Rome in 410, which left the city and its treasury completely shattered. But the end wasn't quick. It was a long, slow goodbye. The gladiator schools get officially shut down in 399. The emperor formally bans combat in 404, but, old habits die hard. The animal hunts actually kept going for another century, like a faint echo of what the games used to be.
But amidst all that slow decline, there's one story, one incredible moment that has come to symbolize the real turning point. It's the story of a monk named Telemachus, who on New Year's Day in 404 decided he'd seen enough.
He literally ran into the middle of the arena, put himself between the fighters, and just begged them to stop. The crowd, furious that someone was interrupting their entertainment, didn't see a hero. They saw a party crasher. They attacked him and stoned him to death, right there on the arena floor.
The public murder of a man of God was just a profound shock, especially to the now Christian emperor. In direct response to this brutal martyrdom, Honorius issued the final decisive ban on all gladiatorial combat. The death of this one man, in protest, became the catalyst that ended the bloodshed for good.
And just like that, a tradition that had defined Rome for more than 6 centuries was done. The silence in the Colosseum must have been absolutely deafening.
So the Colosseum fell silent. But it really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? The arenas might have changed, the rules are certainly different. But has our fundamental human thirst for a public spectacle ever really gone away?